Hello, this is Carl again. Welcome back to Apparent Faith, the video series, which is an accompaniment to my book, Apparent Faith, What Fatherhood Taught Me About the Father's Heart. I'm wearing my Papa shirt today. I think it's appropriate because in the shack, Papa was the name that Paul Young used to refer to God. But also that has been the name that's been assigned to me as Grandpa. So today, as I talk about being a parent and being a grandparent, thinking of the word Papa, that helps me understand God. By looking at that experience, it helps me understand God. When I wrote this chapter, this prayer and challenges chapter of the book, my daughter was 22 years old, and she had just recently given birth to a premature baby. I remember when Lily, my daughter, was 3 years old and used a really, really big word in a sentence for the first time, and it was kind of exciting to me. But I watched as she had her premature baby, and I watched her face those challenges that she went through, and as she met every milestone in that, I was proud of her. Lily's a lot like me. She's kind of stubborn. She likes to discuss and debate things, and she's not afraid to speak up. I think we both know we're not always right, but we do our research and we know what we're talking about if we're going to talk about it, and so we tend to argue those points a little bit. But even though she's not afraid to speak up, I never heard her once in this process feel sorry for herself. I've never heard her say, "Why me?" She prepared herself. She did her research. She was ready, I think. And she just realized maybe that anything can happen, and sometimes it happens to you. Sometime back, Laura and I talked about prayer, and we decided to move beyond the superficial prayer life we used to have. A big change for us was Brian Zahn's prayer school, where he said prayer is not to get something from God, it's for us to be properly formed. And so that through that prayer school and liturgy, that changed our thinking a little bit. I personally have studied some people like Julian of Norwich, and kind of coming to understand that being with God is more of this mystical idea of abiding rather than just bringing a list to God. But standing next to that incubator that day with my premature grandbaby, my daughter and her husband, I was overwhelmed. I had thought to myself I would quote Bob Dylan's slow version of Forever Young to my grandchild, but that just didn't happen. I couldn't get it out. I looked at my grandbaby and I saw the tubes and the monitors, and his skin just looked bruised, and people would say, as I mentioned before, that we were born evil. That's not what I saw when I looked at Jackson. I thought back to creation when God said it is good, and that's what I thought. But as I looked across the incubator, as I looked over at the other side of the room, I caught a glimpse of my baby girl. And she always looks determined, but that day I saw some helplessness in her eyes. I looked at Trevor, my son-in-law, and he had some confusion and concern in his eyes. And I understood because, when I had my firstborn son, I was confused and terrified, really, not knowing what to do with him. And I was facing nowhere near the challenges that these two would face. So I understood. But I stood next to my grandson in the chasm between life and death, and very simply, I just cried. I struggled to accept the situation. I wrestled with the ideas of acceptance, denial, and confusion, and my thoughts were really just cloudy at best. You know, in that time, I didn't pray any eloquent prayers. I didn't give any excellent advice. I didn't write any meaningful prayers or poems. I really was fighting the urge to run out of the room saying, "What the hell, God?" I needed something more than a platitude. I didn't need someone to tell me that this would be better. I just needed to know that somehow we could all navigate it together. I needed a partner that would stand with me and my family. Over time, the things my daughter needed and didn't need became clearer. And because she is who she is, when I didn't get it, she told me. I didn't pray that this would go away. I didn't pray for things to change, and I didn't try to make it change. I just stood in the hospital room and I cried because that seemed like the appropriate thing to do. What God does in our situation is, I think He understands what we need most is for Him to be there. He sits with us, He cries with us, He walks with us, and sometimes He just reminds us, hey, you need to go get something to eat. Physical healing has never been our greatest need. I've always said that. But I don't believe anymore in an angry or retributive God. I also don't believe in a favorite uncle that just gives whatever appeases me. These days I'm focused on the God that shows up at the hospital and stands near my grandson's bed and holds my hand when I cry. And when I look at Him, I don't see the God of my youth. I see a God with eyes full of love and His face stained with tears. Not because He's helpless and not because He's hopeless, but because I'm His child and He's with me.